بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أما بعد. We begin by praising Allah Azza wa Jal with praise and exaltations that only He truly deserves, and asking Him to raise the rank and to bless our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. As for what proceeds, and today we gather in this library, this historical gathering in which we study and we review the works of a mountain of knowledge, rahimahullah. And the Shaykh Rabi ibn Haadi al-Madkhali rahimahullah, we heard yesterday from his seerah and biography, Shaykh Mustafa, hafidhahullah, and we saw the tremendous efforts that the Shaykh put forth in his life in defending the religion, propagating the correct religion, and authoring books to defend the religion and to propagate the truth. And to speak about the writings and the authorships of the Shaykh is something, after starting to gather what I could, is actually something very grand. It's not something easy. It is not really an easy affair, and it was not something that could be done in a few days. And I found that Shaykh Khalid al-Dhufairi, hafidhahullah, the one who wrote a biography for the Shaykh and it was from his close students, gathered the writings of the Shaykh, everything that the Shaykh wrote, in a thabt, which is a collection of his writings, whether it be something that he wrote in the universities as his thesis, or a research he did afterwards, or a book in which he clarified a topic of tawheed or a topic of hadith, or just a short article regarding an individual and his mistakes, or an article regarding a point in the Sunnah, a very specific point in the science of hadith. Gathering all of those writings, they reached over 300 writings the Shaykh gathered. And obviously of different sizes and different lengths, but it was over 300 writings. And that is not including the books that are printed from the explanations of the Shaykh, from what the Shaykh taught. Meaning, if he taught a book and then the audio was transcribed, that was put into a book, not including that. Those 300 don't include his explanations of certain books. So 300 from his own writing. Over 300, rahimahullah. We ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to put it on his scales of good and make it a sadaqah jariyah, a recurring charity for him. For indeed, many of the du'at in the West are only a result and a fruit of his teachings, whether they admit it or not. Whether they admit it or not, these books that the Shaykh authored, they were the ones that rectified and corrected the methodology of the callers to Allah Azza wa Jal. And like I said, it was a difficult task to speak about the books of the Shaykh and the writings of the Shaykh. And this is only a glimpse, as was mentioned, only a nubda, a brief overview of some of the most important works. So I had to limit it to the most important works of the Shaykh, those that he is famously known for, and those that had a big impact upon the Islamic Ummah and the da'wah, the scene of da'wah across the world. And I initially had thought about speaking in topics of aqidah and hadith, But then I said, after I heard Shaykh Mustafa's talk and I looked into the thabt of Shaykh Khalid, I said, let me go into it chronologically, so we can actually travel with the Shaykh as a timeline of when he authored each book and see the reality of the world during that time, what the Shaykh was doing, writing, and what was going on in the rest of the world. And also to see the progression of the Shaykh in his writings. Because there is a misconception that the Shaykh was not an academic scholar. And this misconception hopefully can be put out and put to rest by way of us looking at the authorships of the Shaykh and the topics that he wrote about, especially in his early life, rahimahullah. So without further ado, we get into the first major book that the Shaykh authored. Even though there were some smaller writings that the Shaykh wrote before this. As we know, we heard yesterday, the Shaykh, he was late in high school. And he didn't enter the Jami'ah, the university, until his 30s. And the universities, they are where research is done. And works of scholarly research is produced. But before that, before the Jami'at, the scholars would write research on their own. But obviously when the ilm entered, the knowledge entered into these universities, it became more organized and it became reviewed by the peers. So do not get it misconstrued that the university, the shahada, the certificate that you get, is not what is intended. But there is a benefit in the universities that it organizes the research for the student, and it allows the peers, the teachers of the student, to review his work before it is put out. And from the main works of the Shaykh, from the early works of the Shaykh, was this book that he wrote during his master's program as a thesis to attain his master's in 1397 of the Hijrah. We know he was in the Jamia Islamiyya before that, where he got his bachelor's in 1384. The Shaykh was only 33. So now the Shaykh returned back to the university, the Jamiat Malik Abdul Aziz, almost 10 to 12 years later, to do a master's at the age of 46. This is an encouragement for us that the pursuit of knowledge does not stop at a certain age. He is attaining his master's because the universities now have opened up and now they have these master's programs and doctorate programs. He sees it as a means, the Shaykh, to put forth some scholarly research. And the topic of this book is specifically in the arena of hadith and regarding the Sahihain, specifically Sahih Muslim, the book of Imam Muslim, which any work that is going to research the book of Imam Muslim is going to be a tremendous work, because that is a tremendous authorship. And it's not going to be easy. So the Shaykh did not pick an easy topic to enter into. But he mentions in the Muqaddimah, in the introduction to this book, that he had a love for the Sahih of Imam Muslim. And that love coincided with his scholars and the advisors that he had. From them, Shaykh Hamad al-Ansari. And you know, he was a student of the Muhaddithin at the time in Medina. And so he took upon their path in hadith and writing in hadith and loving hadith. The likes of Shaykh al-Albani, Shaykh Hamad al-Ansari, Shaykh Badi'uddin, Shaykh al-Mubarak Furi, rahimahumullah, These were mountains with regards to the science of hadith that he took from the Shaykh. And this is how he gained that love for hadith. And he wrote this research regarding the Sahih of Imam Muslim. So what was specifically this topic? This topic is regarding the book of Sahih Muslim. So Imam Muslim, he gathered in his book authentic ahadith. Ahadith which he deemed to be authentic. And obviously that is by way of analyzing the chains of narration and studying the men and knowing where this hadith came from and the men that narrated it, and knowing that the different chains of one hadith and making sure there's no defects in it. That studying and that ijtihad in grading a hadith, it is a affair of mankind that is susceptible to error. Anyone who makes ijtihad can make a mistake. So there were imams after Imam Muslim that analyzed the book of Imam Muslim to determine if everything he put in it was sahih, was he correct? And from those imams was al-Imam al-Daraqutni, who came after Imam Muslim by almost 100 years. He died in 385. Imam Muslim died when? 261. Imam al-Daraqutni passed 385. And Imam al-Daraqutni studied the book of Imam Muslim, and he said, he wrote a book, a short book, in which he gathered a few ahadith, not many, a few ahadith in which he thought that the Shaykh, the Imam Muslim, was not correct in grading it as sahih. That it was less than that. Not that it was even da'if, but it was not sahih. It was not to the level of sahih. Some of them may be da'if, some of them may be hasan. So the Shaykh Hamad al-Ansari, advised Shaykh Rabi' to, why don't you make this a point of research? See what Daraqutni said, see what Imam Muslim said, and compare, and you come to a conclusion on who was right. And that's why he titled the book Bayn al-Imamaini, Muslimun wa Daraqutni. Bayn al-Imamaini, meaning a comparison, a study where he compares what Daraqutni said and Imam Muslim said, and to see, come with a natijat, a result, who was correct. And here, as I mentioned, a renowned publication amongst universities to this day, amongst the academic circles, amongst those who study hadith, they refer back to this book. Even the enemies of the Shaykh, they can't deny his knowledge in regards to the science of hadith and what he has put forth, and they quote this book and they mention that it is a beneficial book. And we have this book here, Bayn al-Imamain, even though this was the first maktaba to print it, Maktabat al-Rushd. It has other prints that were, so even the book, the picture in the presentation is much older than this current taba of Bayn al-Imamain. And I want the brothers to pass this around and look at the works of the Shaykh, because we don't have time to enter into all of what the Shaykh spoke about. But a person looks at this knowledge and sees the weight of what the Shaykh has put forth. It is not something light. And the Shaykh authored it in a couple of years. This tremendous work. And so the brothers pass this around and look at the contents while we speak about the other books. And another point that a side note, I wrote here at-tatabbu'at, some people call it at-tatabbu'at of Imam al-Daraqutni. The Daraqutni's analysis of Sahih Muslim, he called it at-tatabbu' or at-tatabbu'at. And there was a Shaykh at the time of Shaykh Rabi', when he was studying, who did his master's in the tahqiq in the verifying and the publication of the book of Darqutni, who was who? Shaykh Muqbil ibn Haadi al-Wadi'i. So we see that our mashayikh, our ulama, they're at the forefront of working with the science of hadith and producing those works that the ummah benefits from. Also, that is also a work that all of the academic circles today refer to, the book of Al-Ilzamat wa Tatabbu' al-Darqutni by the tahqiq of Shaykh Muqbil ibn Hadi al-Wadi'. Moving along. That was the masters. In the following years, directly after that, the Shaykh pursued his doctorate at the same university, Jami'at Malik Abdul Aziz, in Mecca. And this time, his research was going to be a tahqiq. And a tahqiq is a verification and editing of handwritten manuscripts. And there was I believe, a dawra or a workshop seminar about the manuscripts previously at this library. And what that entails is that you go firstly to the libraries that have in them manuscripts, handwritten manuscripts of the Islamic, or the Islamic and the religious works of Islam. They gather all of the writings that have been written by the scholars for centuries. These libraries, some of them based in Muslim countries like Egypt and Turkey and Syria, and some of them in Morocco, and some of them in non-Muslim countries. Some of the libraries in non-Muslim countries like France and England and even America, here in Princeton, New Jersey, there is a library that has Islamic manuscripts. And in it you find books about tafsir written by the early scholars, in handwritten versions of Sahih al-Bukhari. So this is the science of manuscripts. That's a whole science on its own. Verifying manuscripts is another science. So the Shaykh, he was in the science of hadith, and he chose a book to take from manuscript form to publish it into print form. This is known as tahqiq. And the book he chose was a book in a very specific topic or very specific arena of science of hadith. And the science of hadith has many books written about it for centuries. And from the main scholars that wrote about the science of hadith was Ibn al-Salah al-Shirazi from the lands of Persia and Iran today. And this scholar, al-Shirazi, known as Ibn al-Salah, gathered a large book mentioning all of the types of the science of hadith, the different abwab, the different areas of the science of hadith. Over 70 areas of science of hadith he brought into this book, a large book. It's known as Muqaddimat ibn al-Salah, and the real name is Ma'rifat al-Ulum al-Hadith. And this book is a foundation and a resource for everyone who studies the science of hadith wherever they are in the world. Everyone is going to refer to the book of Ibn al-Salah. Even though he passed away 643, nobody that's going to study the science of hadith after Ibn al-Salah except that he's going to refer back to Ibn al-Salah. And this work, Ibn al-Salah's work, had many works done upon it. Explanations, concising of it, summarizing of it, and making it into forms of poetry. So Ibn al-Salah's works was concised and summarized by a-Nawawi twice until it became explained. The summary of Nawawi was explained by Suyuti in Tadrib al-Rawi, a book that we studied in the University of Medina, Tadrib al-Rawi, which is Suyuti's explanation of Nawawi's abridgment, a short summarizing of a book of Ibn Salah. You have also those that made it into lines of poetry, like al-Iraqi. Like al-Iraqi, who was mentioned here. And you have a Suyuti who also wrote a poem. So when you hear Alfiyat al-Iraqi and Alfiyat al-Suyuti, these were poems, 1,000-verse poems that summarized the book of Ibn Salah. And then you had explanations and commentary upon the book of Ibn Salah. And from the people who did commentary, there's many people who did commentary, many scholars that wrote books about explaining the book of Ibn Salah. From them was al-Iraqi himself. So he wrote the poem about it, and he wrote at-Taqid al-Idah, which is commentary upon the book of Ibn Salah. So this commentary, in it, is explanation, clarification, and sometimes criticism of some things that Ibn Salah might have made a mistake in or whatnot. That we said, whenever a person makes ijtihad, there's going to be a mistake, because mankind can make a mistake. And no one's perfect except the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so this affair of criticism, we see as a theme in the works of the Shaykh. A detailed academic criticism. I don't think some of the people saw the book in the back. And so the Shaykh, look at his doctorate, it is the works of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, who died in 852. This book, An-Nukat ala Kitab Ibn Salah, is the commentary, and it's a critical commentary of the specific points in the book of Ibn Salah, and upon the book of al-Iraqi commenting on Ibn Salah's book. So I know this is a more difficult and more precise area of hadith for some of that is the first exposure to it. But what you can take from this is firstly that the Shaykh worked on some of the most precise areas of the science of hadith, and he produced a work here that is from the most important books as a resource for the people who study hadith. Because this book also, when the teachers and the professors in the universities teach science of hadith, they refer you back to the checking of this book by the Shaykh Rabi ibn Haadi al-Madkhali rahimahullah. And so we understand here that the Shaykh, he brought this book from manuscript form, made a verification that everything in it is correct, wrote it down himself, and had it printed. And this is commentary from Ibn Hajar, who is from the great scholars of hadith, 852, who commented on the book of Ibn Salah and the book of al-Iraqi. And the Shaykh, in his, some might say, well, this is not really his work, this is the work of Ibn Hajar. But this was a doctorate, meaning it requires from them verification of the content itself, not only what is written in the manuscript, but the content. They are verifying that the content is sound, it is correct. And if there is some criticism from other scholars upon it, you must bring it in the commentary. This is also the affair of tahqiq, verifying that the content is correct. So the Shaykh, he mentioned everything that Ibn Hajar commented about Ibn Salah. He numbered it, every single comment that the Ibn Hajar made. Then he numbered every single comment that Ibn Hajar made about Ibn al-Iraqi, his Shaykh. Al-Iraqi is the Shaykh of Ibn Hajar. As I said here, the explanation by his teacher, Al-Hafidh al-Iraqi. The teacher of Ibn Hajar was al-Iraqi. And he is writing a criticism of his Shaykh's works to correct what has been maybe a mistake or something, clarify something that was not clear. The Shaykh then also has in this muqaddimah to this tahqiq, criticism, his own criticism. The Shaykh wrote his own commentary an analysis of all of their notes and commentary, what is correct from all of it. So he has his own nukat. The Shaykh has his nukat upon all these other nukat. And a nukat means the precise comment or the precise piece of information. This is a nukat. It's like a gem regarding a certain science. So these are the gems that Ibn Hajar had regarding the book of Ibn Salah. And as we said, the Shaykh analyzed all of that. He has a detailed analysis of all of that. And he brings what they said. And then he brings what he believes is correct from all of it. And this is an in-depth science, so we're not going to spend too long on that. But this is it was doctorate at the age of 49 in the year 1980. In the year what? 1980. This is what the Shaykh was working on. Next, we move something that is maybe more familiar to the English audience, the English-speaking audience. Two books that were authored early in the life of the Shaykh. So in 1403, he authored Makanatu Ahl al-Hadith. This short book, about 50, 60 pages, highlighting the status of the people of Hadith. And I reviewed the muqaddimah of the two previous books, the introduction, and a lot of it is what he brought in this book. So what he studied and found to be beneficial for the general audience, he concised it and put it in this book, Makanat Ahl al-Hadith. Because in those two previous books, in his introduction, he wrote about the status of Hadith and how Allah preserved the Hadith by way of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and their students, and how the people authored books in the science of Hadith after them, and the Rijal and Jarh al-Ta'deel. So he concised all of that and put it in Makanat Ahl al-Hadith, and we see the timelines kind of aligned there. That this book, Makanat Ahl al-Hadith, is kind of like a summary of his two previous introductions. And this was meant for the general audience, not for the academic circles, but for the general audience, to show the people that Allah preserved Hadith just as He preserved the Quran. And the meaning of the ayah, Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun, verily we have sent down the reminder and we shall preserve it, meaning the Quran, and we shall preserve it. It entails, he concludes in this book and shows how it entails also the preservation of the Sunnah. That the preservation of the Quran necessitates the preservation of the Sunnah, and he shows how it was preserved by the way of the people of Hadith in this book, and he shows their status and their praiseworthy effects upon the Ummah. And this was translated by Akhuna Shaykh Abu Hakim Bila Dayus, by the brothers in UK. It was printed by Hidayah Publishing in the 90s. But it was authored in 1403, which was in the 80s. This book was authored in the 80s. First publication in Arabic was 1992. The Jamia Islamiyya actually put out his work in their magazine. The Islamic University put out this book as a part of their magazine. And then it was made a publication in 1992. Also from the works around that time, in 1406, this book that he authored as a curriculum for those teachers that were learning to become teachers. They would take a teaching workshop. The Shaykh was assigned to make a curriculum for the teaching workshop, for the teachers. So he gathered a book about the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and in it is about 21 ahadith, and he explains them, and they are in aqidah and ittiba', focusing on aqidah and the following of the Prophet ﷺ. These hadith revolve around the aqidah and the following of the Prophet ﷺ. So look at the Shaykh's efforts in correcting the teachers, because he knows that the teachers, they have an influence on what? The students. So if he can get to the teachers, if he can correct the teachers' aqidah and put them upon the right path, the students will be upon the right path. The Shaykh was concerned for the ummah to this degree. He said that he could have wrote anything regarding the ahadith, but he chose to write a hadith regarding aqidah, to gather a hadith regarding aqidah and explain them. And this was also translated by our brothers in the UK, by Abu Hakim as well, I believe, Hafidhahullah, and it is available in English. So these two books are available to the English audience today. You know, I think his hard copies are maybe difficult, but online you can find some English soft copies, inshallah ta'ala. Before we go into the next book, any questions about what has, we want to keep the people engaged, inshallah. Any questions about what has passed from the 4 books? طيب. Moving along. We mentioned the 2 last books were 1403 and 1406. Between those 2 times, there was a research that the Shaykh did after his doctorate. And that was another tahqiq, verification of manuscripts. And he chose a book regarding the Sahihain again, because of his love for the Sahihain, the love of these 2 books, Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. And he knew their importance. And the book that he was verifying is a book that was written in defense of the Sahihain by Imam al-Hakim, who died 405. Al-Imam Abu Abdullah al-Hakim al-Naysaburi, who died 405 after the Hijrah, who has many books in the science of Hadith, Ma'rifatu Ulum al-Hadith, and he has this book, al-Madkhali al-Sahih, and he has al-Mustadrak al-Sahihain, which he wrote a hadith that he gathered a hadith that should have been included in the Sahihain. He gathered a hadith that should have been included in the Sahihain and weren't. But the Imams, Imam Muslim, Imam Bukhari, they did not aim to gather all of the Sahih. Rather, they said, we have more Sahih, but these are the most important from the Sahih that we have, the most authentic that we have put forth in our books. So, Al-Hakim is not really criticizing them. He is adding to their works, saying, these hadith that have the same chains as what they brought, so they are also have the same level of authenticity. And he wrote a large book, Al-Mustadrak, and it is well known, except that he mentions about it himself that he didn't review it. So a good portion, or more than half of it, is not reviewed by him. And this is the importance of reviewing your work. And we find that the portion that he didn't review, it is not as precise as the part that he reviewed. And so you find that he might say certain things are authentic and the chains are authentic, but you find that he was mistaken in the part that he didn't review because it wasn't reviewed by him. And this is why some people said that he was mutasahil, but it's not really true leniency. He wasn't lenient. It was just the fact that he didn't review he didn't get to review. He passed away before he could review the portion of that book. He has this other book though, al-Madkhali al-Sahih, because he was also, the Imam was concerned with the books of the Sahihain, and he found in his time, and these doubts continue to today, he found in his time people criticizing the Sahihain and saying that they're not authentic, and saying that they doubt whether these narrators are really trustworthy. So the doubts regarding the Sahihain were old, and he wrote this book, al-Madkhali al-Sahih, to bring to you, he listed all of the narrators of the Sahihain. How many that Bukhari and Muslim agreed upon? How many did Bukhari mention alone? And how many did Muslim mention alone? And how many were the shuyukh of Bukhari alone? And how many were the shuyukh of Muslim alone? And how many were the shaykh of both? And he mentioned the list of non-trustworthy narrators that Imam Bukhari Muslim did not put any hadith from them. He listed all of non-trustworthy narrators. So he listed these narrators and mentioned some kalam, some speech about them, and he mentioned all of this to defend the Sahihain. And the Shaykh, he verified this manuscript and it was published. The first volume of it was published in 1984, and then it was completed in 1421, which corresponds to 2001. So this work was an ongoing project of the Shaykh, which with a group of students, he completed it in 1421. In 1421. So the Shaykh was active. Look, from 1984 to 2001, the Shaykh is active in research. He might have had other writings at that time regarding certain individuals and refutation and speaking about the problems of the ummah, but at the same time, he's not silent, or he's not resting and not taking it easy with regards to his academic seeking of knowledge side. He's working. While he's putting out works on this side, he's also doing research behind the scenes. From 1984 to 2001, he worked on the completion of this book. And you will see the other works that he's going to be putting out from 1984 to 2001. Not something slight. From them, the great work, the classical work, and from this the most known works of the Shaykh, منهج الأنبياء في الدعوة إلى الله فيه الحكمة والعقل. And this is what we have in front of us from his Majmu'ah as well. The hard copy and the soft copy, the original publication of it from Dar al-Salafiyya in 1986. 1986. And the purpose, the reason why the Shaykh wrote this book, because you have the emergence of who in that time, two big groups in the Muslim Ummah that claim to be rectifiers of the Ummah, good doers. Two main groups are emerging in the Muslim Ummah at the time. And they have, gained some popularity. The Jama'at al-Tabligh and the Ikhwan al-Muslimun. And the Shaykh is, while he's doing his research and he's working in the academic study, he's witnessing, he's seeing all of this in the scene of da'wah and the ummah, and he's seeing what's happening. So he's not going to stay silent. The Shaykh, he is brave, he was bold in addressing the errors of the people with rifq, with gentleness, but also with knowledge. So he authored this book to show what was the call of the Anbiya, those who truly came for rectification. What was their call? What did they focus on? And he mentions this with detail. So he starts with Nuh alayhi salam, and Ibrahim alayhi salam, and Yusuf alayhi salam, and Musa alayhi salam, and the Anbiya in general, till he gets to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and mentioning their stories and what they began with and what they addressed in the beginning, and what they dealt with in their societies. What were the problems of their societies? And what did they choose to focus on? Did they focus on the affair of oppression or murder and sin and fornication, or did they focus on Tawheed? They focused on Tawheed and calling to Allah first. This was the methodology of the Anbiya. This is what this book is focused on. And it refutes the path of those who don't focus on Tawheed, who want to just gather the people without any knowledge and not refuting and speaking bad about, or speaking with the truth about, regarding shirk, regarding polytheism and acts of shirk and associating partners with Allah. This is what these groups they did. The Jama'at al-Tabligh and Ikhwan al-Muslimun, they gathered the people and stay silent on their opposition to the foundations of Islam. They stay silent on their deviant aqeedah. They stay silent when they were committing shirk, to gather the people, to thinking that gathering the ranks is more important than speaking ill of, or speaking with the truth against the errors of the people, errors of the Muslims, grave errors in shirk, and they would stay silent. And in the end of this book, there is a detailed refutation of Abu al-A'la Mawdudi. And this name should be known to the English-speaking audience, because he was an Indian figure, scholarly figure. And so he wrote books regarding the rectification of the Ummah. And some of his books were translated into English because he was an Indian scholar. And in it were some major mistakes, major errors that the Shaykh highlights by bringing his speech verbatim from his books. And this was a way of the Shaykh. He didn't oppress anyone. Whenever he refuted a person in writing, he would bring his speech verbatim. and make sure that the one who narrated the speech or the one who collected the speech was trustworthy. If it was not written or masmu' or heard in the audio, like we heard yesterday, bring the audio, verify that what is being said. So the Shaykh would verify what was being said. He would brought the words of Abu al-A'la al-Mawdudi and verbatim and refute him, refuting the mistakes. And what from his mistakes was that you see in Manhaj al-Anbiya is that he saw that inciting the ummah against its rulers is the way. Inciting the Muslims against their ruler, against the oppressive rulers, is the way to please Allah, rather than calling them to Tawheed. This, in a nutshell, this was the way of Abu al-A'la al-Mawdudi. That he saw that removing the oppression of the rulers is the main goal. And this wasn't the goal of Musa alayhi salam. This wasn't the goal of Yusuf alayhi salam. This wasn't the goal of those who lived in the time of oppressors. Ibrahim alayhi salam. Those Anbiya who lived in the time of oppressive tyrants and kings, their goal was not to, first goal, the main goal was to rectify the people's hearts by Tawheed and calling them to the oneness of Allah, and then by way of that, establishing the Tawheed upon the earth. That is the way to please Allah Azza wa Jal. But they, this Abu al-A'la al-Mawdudi and the people that are with him, and the Akhwan al-Muslimun are affected by him, and they have their own similar groups in that part of the world, that they want to rebel against the Muslim leaders first. This is what they see to be the main way to please Allah Azza wa Jal. Rebel against the ruler. Rebel against any oppression. Not teach the people Tawheed, not to teach the people their religion, but to rebel against the ruler. And the Shaykh, in this classical piece, in this mashhur, famous work, which has been translated into English by Shaykh al-Ustadh Abu Talha Dawood Burbank, rahimahullah. Abu Talha was from the diligent students from the university that brought back the methodology of the Shaykh to the West. Not just the methodology of the Shaykh, but the methodology of the Mashayikh of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the Salafi methodology. And this is why I said that many of the callers to this manhaj, to this methodology, were influenced by the works of Shaykh Rabi ibn Haadi al-Madkhali. And this book was translated very early in the late 1990s, I believe. It is very well known amongst the English-speaking audience. For those that don't know it, we'll pass it around, inshallah. 1997, it says first edition. So take a look at this book, take a look at its contents, see what the Shaykh wrote about. You can see the refutation of Abu al-A'la in the end. And one last comment about this book. What time is it? Huh? What time is the adhan? Huh? And the iqama? Okay, la bas. No. In the end of this book, though, there was some maybe kalam that the Shaykh brought had caused some confusion. The Shaykh quoted Sayyid Qutb to show that even Sayyid Qutb, who was close to Mawdudi, the Shaykh quoted him on purpose, and he was from the founders of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. Even he said in his latter part of his life, agreed with returning to the Aqidah al-Islamiyya, to teaching the people the correct Aqidah. And he brought it just as a side note that this is, even Sayyid Qutb agreed with this. Not to say that Sayyid Qutb was upon the truth. And to show that, the Shaykh had several books in refutation of Sayyid Qutb at a time where no one was speaking about Sayyid Qutb. Sayyid Qutb was an Egyptian writer that was a prolific figure, very well known in the Arab world, who wrote about the rectification of the Muslim Ummah. And he wrote a tafsir, fi dhilal al-Quran, and he wrote many other writing, books and authorships regarding Islam. But in it were many mistakes, because he didn't have the proper education and learning this religion from its sources. And he was influenced by communism and Karl Marx. And he was influenced by the West in his ideology, more than he was influenced by the true teachings of Islam. And we will get to the refutations that the Shaykh wrote about him. Before that, we have this book that the Shaykh, we're going chronologically, so that was 1406. Next is another tahqiq that the Shaykh did in this time. And we have it here in front of us too, in the but we'll leave it on the presentation for now, inshallah. In 1409, this book was published, but it was worked on before that. It was worked on before 1409. So we see from 1406 to 1409, the Shaykh is working on this book and the tahqiq of this book, which is قاعدة جليلة في التوسل والوسيلة. Should be. This is a mistake here. التوسل والوسيلة. Should be التوسل والوسيلة as is seen in the cover of the book. And the contents is, the author is Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, the great scholar of Islam, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, who died 728 after the Hijrah in the 8th century. And it is a book regarding intercession and shafa'ah and dua, and it is a refutation of those who seek to go through other than Allah to get to Allah, in a nutshell. So the way of the Sufiya, the way of the grave worshippers, the way of those who associate partners with Allah as a middleman, as an intermediary between them and Allah. So Allah, the Shaykh, he's bringing the proofs from the Quran and the Sunnah that is not a way that is accepted by Allah Azza wa Jalla, to go through a intermediary. That tawassul has a permissible form, and that is by way of your actions and the names of Allah Azza wa Jalla. You call upon Allah by His names, and you call upon Allah with your actions that you have done, but you don't go through intermediaries. And a way of the shafa'ah, the intercession, which is permissible and what is not permissible from it. So he mentions that and principles regarding that, at-tawassul wal-wasila, and all of these topics about tawheed, the fundamental of the religion. Again, we see the Shaykh showing concern for the fundamentals of the religion and clarifying to the people the fundamentals of the religion by making a verification of this text, of this manuscript. And the reason for this was that this book was actually printed before the Shaykh did the tahqiq of it. It was actually in print form. There was 2 prints of it before the Shaykh did it. Why did the Shaykh decide to reprint this book? Because of one mistake, a sentence that the previous editors, the previous verifiers made a mistake in, which he deemed to be grave. That this book must be redone, and the truth of that sentence must be found. So he says in the muqaddimah, أول الأسباب وأهمها هو أني في إحدى مطالعاتي في هذا الكتاب استوقفتني كلمة استبعدت أن تكون ممن هو دون شيخ الإسلام ابن تيمية فضلا عن أن تكون منه، والكلمة هي والرغبة إلى الله ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. He said from the main reasons, and maybe the only reason that he redid, or from the main reasons, he mentions other reasons that the importance of the topic, but from the main reasons he redid this book, or reprinted it, because in one of his lookings into the book, one of his readings of the book, he stopped at this sentence that he said, it is far removed that Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah would say this. And that statement, and far removed that he would say it or it is from him in any way. And that statement was that it was ascribed to Ibn Taymiyyah that he said, وَالرَّغْبَةُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. Look at this. الرَّغْبَةُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ is the yearning and the desiring of Allah and His Messenger. And al-raghbatu is an action of the heart, which is considered worship. That he understands that even Ibn Taymiyyah mentions in the book, at-tawassul wal-wasila, that it is only to be for Allah Azza wa Jal. As he mentions in the end of this, the proofs in the Quran. فَإِذَا فَرَغْتَ فَانْصَبْ وَإِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ فَارْغَبْ. In the end of Surah Al-Sharh, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, and if you are free, then stand up in prayer and in uprightness, and to your Lord, turn your hearts in raghbah, in desire and yearning. Ar-raghbatu ila Allah only. Then we see in Surah At-Tawbah, Allah says, وَقَالُوا حَسْبُنَا اللَّهُ سَيُؤْتِينَ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ وَرَسُولُهُ إِنَّا إِلَى اللَّهِ رَاغِبُونَ. They say, what Allah has given us will suffice us, and Allah will give us from His bounty, and the Messenger will give us from His bounty. So the bounty, what Allah has given the Prophet ﷺ, will be given to the people, the sadaqah, speaking about the sadaqah. Allah will give us from His bounty, and His Messenger will give us. That is permissible, whatever they gave them tangible. But when Allah mentions al-raghbah, what do these poor desire? Did they desire the Messenger with their hearts? No. Inna ilallahi raghibun. Verily we turn to Allah with our yearning and our desire. So al-raghbah is only ascribed to Allah in the religion, this action of the heart. So the Shaykh, because of this one sentence, said this book has to be reprinted. This cannot be from Shaykh al-Islam. And this is the science of verifying the text. To make sure that text that was written, it was not a mistake of the nasikh, of the scribe. It was not a mistake that was added by those who wanted to corrupt the religion. Perhaps the Sufiya got hands of his manuscripts and they changed it. Because they make intercession with the Prophet ﷺ. So to make sure that this was from the author, you have to verify the text. Verify the text. And this was the verification. And he mentions that in this muqaddimah here, this portion of the muqaddimah, that even though there were great muhaqqiqun, who considers them from the noble muhaqqiqin of his time, Abdul Qadir al-Arnaut and Shu'aib al-Arnaut, both of them checked the previous editions. And they both missed this error. So, shows you that Shaykh was diligent in finding the mistakes, especially those grave mistakes, and correcting them. He did not stay silent, and he was active in correcting the truth and rectifying what was put out to the people. And we have with us here a later copy of this book, which is a good print of this book by Dar al-Mirath al-Nabawi. Here, قاعدة جليلة في التوسل والوسيلة, by the author Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. We have تحقيق Rabi ibn Haadi, Shaykh al-Allama al-Doctor Rabi ibn Haadi. So when you see the books that are printed by Salafis, you see the titles of the Shaykh change. Here we have a Shaykh al-Allama al-Doctor. When you see the books that are printed by non-Salafis, they might just say a Doctor or a Shaykh. But this was the brothers that were close to the Shaykh. And this was At-Tab'at al-Ula in 2019. So the works of the Shaykh are constantly being reprinted. We said the first publication was when? In 1989. And in 2019, 30 years later, the works of the Shaykh are still being reprinted. And we can pass this around and see the works of the Shaykh. Now, so those 5 books that we mentioned already, those are considered from the main works of the Shaykh from his earlier life, rahimahullah. And we see now, when it comes to close to the early 90s and the mid 90s, the Islamic world was changing. The internet was being developed. The shubuhat of the callers were now being widespread. And there was also a sahwa, awakening by the Muslim ummah and the scholars, that was much being written in the late 80s and 90s. So the Shaykh, he's keeping up with the times, and he's noticing what is going on in the ummah. And now he must address the mistakes and the errors of the callers to Islam with respect. Even all these writings that you see, even when he spoke about Mawdudi, If you look at the end when he's speaking about Mawdudi Manhaj al-Anbiya, he said he put forth a lot of good, but these are grave errors. These are grave mistakes. We can't stay silent on them. So with respect, always teaching the people to have respect and be gentle in your refutation, in the way Allah Azza wa Jalla taught Musa to say to Fir'aun, فَقُولَ لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا لَعَلَّهُ يَتَذَكَّرُ وَيَخْشَى. Musa and Harun were told by Allah, say a kind, gentle word to Fir'aun so that he be reminded. So the Shaykh, he took this in criticism and advising to be gentle, to be soft. All of these writings, if you open up the books and how he addresses some of the major figures of misguidance and deviation, he addresses them with lutf, with gentleness. Calling them my brother, calling them the great Shaykh, calling them with words of respect. And so we have in that same year that he did Qa'idat al-Jalila, in 1989, this book was printed, كشف موقف الغزالي من السنة وأهلها ونقض بعض آرائه. Now he starts to refute and to criticize those callers that are in the Muslim world that are opposing the way of the Salaf al-Salih, the way of the pious predecessors, the way of the Sahaba, and how they understood the religion. So from the mistakes of al-Ghazali, this is the current day Ghazali, not the old one, not Ulum al-Din. This is No, this is the current day. Yeah, this is Muhammad ibn Hassan. The current contemporary of the Shaykh. A contemporary. And the mistakes were that he didn't accept any hadith that opposes intellect. Classic ilm al-kalam rhetoric. That whatever hadith doesn't accept, in my mind, the intellect doesn't accept it, it can't be sahih. And then they try to add a shubha that it opposes the Quran. But the Quran and the Sunnah are taken together. And they are both revelation from Allah. And if you can make jama', there is no contradiction between the Sunnah and the Quran. If the Sunnah is authentic, it's not going to contradict the Quran because it's from the same source, from Allah Azza wa Jalla. There's no contradiction. The contradiction is in the mind of the people because their minds are deficient and their intellect is deficient. Can't understand certain things. We can't understand everything about Allah. How can you understand everything in the Sunnah? So, if you try to judge the hadith by your intellect, you will go astray. You accept وَمَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. Whatever the Prophet brings you, then accept it. So the Sunnah and the way of the people of the Sunnah, the way of the Sahaba was to accept what the Prophet came with if it was authentic. But no, al-Ghazali, no. Even the hadith is in Sahih Muslim, Sahih Bukhari, if it goes against his intellect, can't be true. From the examples that he brings, is the hadith that the Prophet's mother and father are in the hellfire. It's Sahih. No, it can't be true. Because of his love for the Prophet ﷺ, so-called love for the Prophet ﷺ, his mother and father can't be in the hellfire. The Prophet ﷺ's mother and father is in the hellfire. The Prophet ﷺ said it himself. And this is hadith, sahih. But he opposes the hadith because of his intellect. Also the hadith of al-Radha'a. The Prophet ﷺ told a sahabiya who had a stepson, Salim. It was a stepson, or was it a son? It was a slave. Afwan, it was a slave. It was a slave that was gifted to her, and she had haraj, or her husband had haraj. He had some uncomfortability with this slave being around her all the time. He was not mahram. So in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ was advised that she give him from her breast milk, and he would become haram for her. And he was older in age. Al-Ghazali, it's no good. Intellect doesn't accept it. Can't come to peace with it, so it can't be true. So it cannot be true. Yeah. I guess we'll break. But we'll break at the. No. In 5 minutes, inshallah. We'll break in 5 minutes. Let's complete the slide, inshallah, and then we come back for a little bit afterward, inshallah. Now, so al-Ghazali, he brings the likeness of these ahadith. And he even rejects that looking like the Prophet ﷺ in his outward appearance is actually sunnah. He says that's not sunnah. Looking like the Prophet ﷺ, wearing an imama, wearing what he wore, that's not sunnah. That's not what the Quran came with, because it goes against his intellect. And dressing like they dress in his time is not agreeing with his intellect. And he rejects it. So the Shaykh refutes all these points in this book against al-Ghazali. And we see that these doubts reoccur. So these books are important for us in refuting the doubts that occur regarding the Sunnah of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Another book regarding the hadith, and also in defending the Sunnah, is a taqsim al-hadith ila al-sahih wa hasan al-da'if. Also at 1411, 1991. This was in defense of the Imam Muslim as well, and Imam al-Bukhari, and the way of Ahl al-Hadith, because there emerged in this time, there were some individuals that criticized the scholars of Hadith, and that the early scholars did not say Hasan, Sahih, and Da'if. Where did you guys get this from? This ranking of Hadith. And so he explains where this ranking emerged from, and that it coincides and agrees with what the early scholars of Hadith said. And even though the wording might be different, the terminology might be different, the meaning and the understanding is the same. And he has other books, writings, refuting an individual by the name of Hamza al-Milibari, who wrote about this topic, about manhaj al-mutaqaddimin, like the early scholars and what they were upon. And he criticizes even the early scholars, even Imam Muslim, this one, he criticizes him. So the Shaykh wrote 3 refutations about this Milibari, showing the status of Ahl al-Hadith and how they were correct, and how this one was incorrect in his analysis of the works of the early scholars and the later scholars. Also in this book, منهج أهل السنة والجماعة في نقد الرجال والكتب والطوائف. You see here in 1992, 1412 after the Hijrah, the Shaykh, he is writing also another classical work regarding the methodology of the people of the Sunnah, Ahl al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah, in criticizing the men in the books and the groups. So now we see that the Shaykh, what he has taken from his research and his long years of study. Now he is in 1992, 1412. How old is the Shaykh? 60. So in his 60s, now the Shaykh is seeing himself as now an elder amongst the students, and he is seeing now the progression of the da'wah and how the direction it's taking in the ummah. So he is writing this book to remind the people that from the ways of Ahl Sunnah is to command with the good and forbid evil. And forbidding evil requires that you don't stay silent. من رأى منكم منكرا فليغيره بيده فإن لم يستطع فبلسانه. This hadith, this famous hadith of Abi Sa'id al-Khudri, radiyallahu anhu, that if one of you sees an evil, then he must change it with his hand. If he cannot, then he changes it with his tongue. If he cannot, then he hate it with his heart. That changing it with the tongue is what? Is speaking out against it and criticizing and refuting, not staying silent. So the Prophet ﷺ taught us to be from those who command with good and forbid evil. This is the way of Ahl Sunnah. Allah says, كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر. You are the best of nations to come out to the people, because you command with good and you forbid evil. So this refutation that the Shaykh took on as a way, and he was brave enough to be on the forefront, because remember, when you are on the forefront of refuting, you're also on the forefront of getting criticism and attacked. And the arrows that you shot out will be shot back at you. So the Shaykh, he is putting himself out there for the sake of the religion. And that's why to this day, he is the most that is criticized, even though the other mashayikh, they are with him. But he was the brave one to speak. So, and he was the one that was most criticized. And Shaykh Luhidan mentioned that perhaps Allah wanted a higher level for him in Jannah, so he made him on the forefront to gain the hasanat of those who spoke ill of him. Perhaps Allah wanted to raise Shaykh Rabi, so he allowed the people to speak against him, so that gives him more hasanat. As we know, the one who backbites, the one who speaks ill, he is the muflis, he's the bankrupt one, because eventually he will get all the people's bad deeds. His good deeds will go, and then he's going to take their bad deeds. So the Shaykh Rabi is getting people's good deeds, and he's giving them his bad deeds because they spoke ill of him without right. But he spoke with right. He spoke with the truth. He spoke with ilm. And he is teaching the people that this is a methodology. The methodology of Ahl Sunnah in criticizing the men, meaning individuals, wal kutub, and the books, and the tawa'if, and the groups. That this is the way of Ahl Sunnah. Ibn Umar, when he saw the Qadariyah, أخبرهم أني بريء منهم وأنهم براء مني, and tell them I'm free of them and they're free of me. It's the way of the companions. It's criticize. Show the people the truth. Ibn Abbas, Khawarij, advising, showing the people the truth. Now, so we will conclude with this slide and go pray inshallah. We'll come back for a few more slides. بإذن الله. جزاكم الله خيرا. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله وليكم فاستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله ما بعد. We continue with our brief overview and glimpse at the works and the writings of the Shaykh rahimahullah. And we stopped at the year 1412 Hijri, 1992. That was the last book we mentioned, Manhaj Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah fi Naqd al-Rijali wal Kutubi wal Tawa'if. We mentioned the contents of this book and the reason of authoring this book. In the following year, we find the first refutation upon the founder of al-Ikhwan al-Muslimin, Sayyid Qutb, the one we mentioned earlier, that was mentioned in Manhaj al-Anbiya at the end. This is the first of the refutations of the Shaykh against Sayyid Qutb. And he, as we said, this Sayyid Qutb was a very prominent figure in the Islamic world. And he was considered a prolific writer. Like, he wrote a lot about the religion, and the many of the Muslims read his works. Even some of the scholars thought good of him. Even some of the scholars, the people of Sunnah, thought good of him because they didn't really know the contents of what he had written. Not the founder. Said Hassan al-Banna is the founder, but Sayyid Qutb is from the influencers of Ikhwan al-Muslimin. Founder is Hassan al-Banna, Jazakallahu khairan. And Sayyid Qutb was the one who greatly influenced that movement, that group. And they are a large group. They have many followers in the world. And they themselves differ amongst themselves upon different trajectories, but all of them opposing the Sunnah. So some of them take a more political stance, some of them take a more Sufi and a more spiritual approach. But they all, in the end of the day, ascribe themselves to this hizb, to this group, and they have this partisanship, and they love and they hate for it. The Ikhwan al-Muslimin, this is the group we're speaking about. And they were heavily influenced by the writings of Sayyid Qutb. And when the Shaykh, he saw this in the world, saw that, and he went into the works of Sayyid Qutb and saw what he was writing about, and saw that he was influenced by Karl Marx. Sayyid Qutb was influenced by Karl Marx, the communist, and he had ideas of this rebelling as well, like Maududi did. And he was influenced by Maududi and this rebelling against the Muslim rulers, and then all the Muslim rulers are kuffar and the likes of that. And he not with that, direct, clear speech, but this is what he was teaching the people and inciting them upon. But with regards to the foundations of the religion, Sayyid Qutb was very deviant, meaning the beliefs. Especially when it came to the Sahaba, especially when it came to the companions of the Messenger Muhammad ﷺ, and how he spoke about them. And he was influenced by the Shia in this, the Rafidah, because their books were prominent or widespread in Egypt. And he was reading the books of the Shia. And this is considered, this first book in 1413, 1993, is also considered a refutation of the Rafidah Shia, because he addresses these points regarding the companions that Sayyid Qutb speaks about. And he spoke ill of Uthman radiallahu anhu. He spoke ill of some of the other companions, and he says the revolt against Uthman was from the soul of Islam, it's from the spirit of Islam that they revolted against Uthman radiallahu anhu. And so the Shaykh addresses this aqeedah of Sayyid Qutb and his ideology. أضواء إسلامية على عقيدة سيد قطب وفكره. The light of Islam, they shine the light of Islam upon the beliefs of Sayyid Qutb and his ideology. Meaning, what does it say in regards to Islam and how weighing it with Islam? What does the aqeedah, how does it stand? How does it compare with the aqeedah of Islam? So that's in 1413, 1993. This is the first written refutation. Then in 1415 we have al-Awasim مما في كتب سيد قطب من القواصم. Again, this book has more quotations from the books of Sayyid Qutb themselves, quoting his errors, speaking ill about the Sahaba, speaking ill about the Anbiya, going astray in the affairs of Aqeedah. And this is highlighted in this book, Al-Awasim, which is a very famous refutation. So 2 refutations in 2 years. Before we go on to the next refutation of Sayyid Qutb, in 1415 as well, there was a book by the name al-Mahajjatul Bayda fi Himayat al-Sunnah. This was similar to the previous book, Manhaj Ahl al-Sunnati wal Jama'ah fi Naqd al-Rijal. It's also a book about defending the Sunnah and refuting the people who oppose it, al-Mahajjatul Bayda. So those who want to read about defending the Sunnah and refuting those who oppose it, go back to al-Mahajjatul Bayda fi Himayat al-Sunnah. You see, the Shaykh had many works in defending the Sunnah. 1415, he wrote yet another book refuting Sayyid Qutb. 2 books wasn't enough. He needed to write another book called Mata'inu Sayyid Qutb fi Ashabi Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And here he also highlighted the criticism and the insults that Sayyid Qutb made against the Sahaba. And the Prophet ﷺ said what? لا تسبوا أصحابي لا تسبوا أصحابي لا تسبوا أصحابي. The Prophet ﷺ said 3 times, do not revile my companions. Do not revile my companions. Do not revile my companions. For one of you, لو أن أحدكم أنفق مثل أحد ذهبا ما بلغ مد أحدهم ولا نصيفه. That if one of you was to give the mountain of Uhud in gold, it would not reach the amount that they give in a handful of what they gave, or half a handful of what they gave. Meaning what they gave, even if it was a handful, was more beloved to Allah, more rewarding with Allah than your mountain of Uhud on gold. Do not revile my companions, the Prophet ﷺ said, because that is their status in Islam. So Sayyid Qutb had many insults and revilements of the companions, which Shaykh Rabi' rahimahullah brought out to the people. The people didn't know about this. The scholars of Islam did not know about the filth of Sayyid Qutb and what he had wrote in his books until Shaykh Rabi' showed it to the people with his own works, with his own quotes from his books. Later on, these very quotes and these attacks against the Sahaba and his mistakes in Aqidah were put together in another book, Nadra to Sayyid Qutb ila Ashabi Rasulullah, with the pictures of the book itself. So this book, Nadra to Sayyid Qutb ila Ashabi Rasulullah, it has the actual photographs from his books in the actual book. So this is when the time now had become more modern and technology had made easy this copying and photographing and scanning. They would scan his books into this refutation. So you can see yourself. No, the Shaykh didn't lie about Sayyid Qutb. He brought what he said with the pictures, with the actual pictures. So we see that the Shaykh, he was from the first and from the strongest refuters against Sayyid Qutb. In 1424, the Shaykh saw that the groups that deviated, their focus was on attacking the Sunnah. Attacking the Sunnah of the Messenger Muhammad ﷺ. Because they knew if they can get to the Sunnah and refute it, they could have their beliefs without nobody speaking ill of them. Because nothing in the Quran clearly opposed them. The Sunnah though opposed them. This is why when Ali radiallahu anhu sent Ibn Abbas to refute the Khawarij, he said to him what? إِذَا خَاصَمُوكَ بِالْقُرْآنِ فَخَاصِمْهُمْ بِالسُّنَّةِ. If they try to argue with the Quran, argue with them with the Sunnah, because the Sunnah will refute them. So the way of Ahl al-Bid'ah always, the Mu'tazila, the Jahmiyyah, the Asha'ira, the Maturidiyya, the Khawarij, the Qadariyya, they all are in unison about trying to refute the Sunnah in some way. Either making false ahadith that will aid them, mawdu'at, lies, fabricated ahadith. Or if they can't do that, they can't just lie, they will make the hadith that is authentic sound like it is da'if, appear like it is weak. Authentic hadith? No, that's weak. Why is it weak? Well, only one Sahabi narrated it. Only 2 Sahaba narrated it. As if it is a condition for more than one Sahabi to narrate a hadith for it to be authentic. As if that was a thing. But it was never a thing. The first hadith in Bukhari is from one Sahabi. What's the first hadith in Sahabi? إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Umar radiallahu anhu, the only Sahabi who heard that hadith. And the only person who heard it from Umar is Alqamah. And the only person who heard it from Alqamah is Muhammad ibn Ibrahim al-Taymi. And the only person who heard it from him was Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Ansari. So 4 generations, only one person heard this hadith from the previous generation. That is the epitome of what they call a gharib hadith, ahad hadith. And the Shaykh Imam Bukhari puts it as the first hadith in the Sahih Bukhari. It is one of the most authentic ahadith. So it's not conditioned that one person. But these groups, especially the Asha'ira and the Mu'tazila, they started to say it's a condition for a hadith to be narrated from at least 10 Sahaba and 10 Tabi'een and 10 Tabi'een for we consider this hadith to be accepted because it is doubtful, it's suspect, dhanni, la yufidu al-yaqeen. It's not certain, it's doubtful until it reaches a certain amount of Sahaba. They brought this claim falsely, not from the people, it's not from the way of Ahl al-Hadith, not at all, not from the 10 generations of the people of Hadith. This came about later on. And so the Shaykh, when he sees that this is their shubha, this is their doubt, he writes a book. This Hujjiyat Khabar al-Ahad fil Aqaid wal Ahkam. Hujjiyat Khabar al-Ahad fil Aqaid wal Ahkam. The evidence of the narrations that are from singular sources or from ahad sources, meaning only 1 or 2 or 3 narrators in each level of the chain. This is a hadith of ahad. This is a whole other bab that we're not going to enter into. But generally, a hadith of ahad is the opposite of al-mutawatir. And al-mutawatir is something that has an abundant amount of people in each level of the chain that you can be sure that there was no lie. They can have an agreed upon a lie. That's mutawatir. They say it must be mutawatir. But that is not the way of Ahl Sunnah and not the way of Ahl Hadith. And the Shaykh from his works, his previous works with Sahihain, and the Sahih Muslim, and the works that he did research on, he knows this for sure. And he mentioned in the introduction of this book his works. And he mentioned his refutation of Ghazali, in which he mentioned that it's sufficient the hadith comes from one source and it's authentic chain, that we accept it. We don't oppose it with our intellect. So he mentions the works, his refutation of Ghazali in the introduction, because what? This was 1424. When did he refute Ghazali? 1409. Before that, 1409. And he wrote Taqsim al-Hadith, 1411, where he commented on what is the condition for a hadith to be authentic. He has studied this. He has written about it. So now, 10, 15 years later, when you have these people using the excuse or the doubt that this hadith didn't come from multiple chains, we can't accept it. Even the hadith is authentic chain, they're not accepting it because it needs to be able to mutawatir. So he wrote a whole book refuting them. He wrote a whole book refuting them, titled Hujjiyatu Khabar al-Ahadi fi al-Aqaid wal-Ahkam. Also, these same individuals that reject the hadith al-Ahad, only in Aqidah though, only when it opposes their Aqidah, but they accept it in fiqh. They will act on it in fiqh. So a lot of the ahadith that teach us how to pray, how to give zakat, and how to make hajj, they're hadith ahad. They don't have these mutawatir chains, but they act upon them. They make a distinction between fiqh, ahkam, and aqidah. The Shaykh is saying, the hujjiyatu qabl al-ahad fil aqaid wal ahkam. The ahad, these ahadith that come from one chain, they are a proof in aqidah and in ahkam. And an example that they give, which is ajib, from these Mu'tazila and these intellectuals and ilm al-kalam, the people of rhetoric, is that in the tashahhud, before the taslim, you seek refuge from four things. From adab Jahannam, وعذاب النار, عذاب القبر عفوا, جزاك الله خير, that's the shahid actually, وعذاب أو فتنة المحيا والممات, وشر فتنة مسيح الدجال. From four things a person must seek refuge from before he makes taslim in salah. That hadith is ahad. But the books of fiqh will teach you to seek refuge from these four books, from these four affairs, right? When it comes to aqidah, these same individuals who say to seek refuge from the adab al-qabr, they don't accept adab al-qabr as a real thing. It's not real. They don't accept adab al-qabr. They don't believe in adab al-qabr. Why? Because they lived in the grave and there was no adab, there was no punishment. Their intellect did not accept the adab al-qabr, but they seek refuge from it in the salah. So the Shaykh said, you can't distinguish between ahkam and aqaid. If you act upon it in fiqh, you must act upon it in your beliefs. And you must accept it in your beliefs. So this is an example how this book is a proof against them, and it shows how the religion did not come with what they are speaking with. It came with the opposite. And the Shaykh refuted them in this book. And it's a scholarly refutation, academic, because he brings many of the quotes from the ulama, the scholars before him, and their proofs and evidences against this. And we can pass this around, but just remember, this is my book, it's not the library's. Now, moving along. So that was 1424, correct? 1424 also, there's a feminist movement that arises in Saudi Arabia. 2004, the feminists have arrived in Saudi Arabia. And the Shaykh is taking notice. And they had a seminar asking for women's rights. So, Shaykh from his way, let's not stay silent. So he wrote, الحقوق والواجبات على الرجال والنساء. The rights and the obligations upon men and women in Islam. And this was translated in that smaller picture, the rights and obligations upon men and women in Islam. Who was this done by? Anybody know? Who was this translation done by? I don't remember. In my mind, I feel like it was Shaykh Rashid, but I can be mistaken. Ala kullin, this book was written by the Shaykh in 14 1424. And like we said, the Shaykh, from his way, if he saw evil, he spoke against it. When he saw evil, he spoke against it. And he wrote. He didn't just speak without knowledge. Because there are people who want to speak, but they're not qualified to speak. And they want to write, but they're not qualified to write. The Shaykh wrote with knowledge. When he spoke with knowledge. This is why Shatibi said, if you command with good and you forbid evil, then command and forbid upon knowledge and upon patience and upon rifq. When you command with good and forbid evil, command and forbid upon knowledge and patience and rifq. So that is 1424. Jazakallahu khairan. Rafa'allahu qadrak. Jazakallahu khairan. The library is muhim, the library is mufid. It's beneficial to have this library. The book is here, and we can shine the light on it. So this book was translated by Rabi. Translator is not mentioned. على كل Rabi, a bookstore in Dallas back in the day, did this. And this was in 2007, first edition. So, an important book that's still relevant to our day and time. And so the brothers should take a look at it as well. This is the library's copy. 1427, which corresponds to 2007. The Ikhwan al-Muslimun, they made a big mistake in aligning themselves with the Shia. Because they could have fooled more people if they didn't align with the Shia. But because they aligned themselves with the Rafida Shia, they made it very easy for the people to reject them. And so, the Shaykh also knows about the Ikhwan and aligning themselves with the Shia. So he wrote a book against the Rafida. And from the Rafida's claim is that the Quran is incomplete. That some of the Sahaba hid some of the Quran. And they oppose the clear text of the Quran. And so the Shaykh wrote Al-Intisaru li Kitab al-Aziz al-Jabbar, which is from the major books in refutation of the Rafida. Again, this is all, look at the Shaykh's far goal. He knows the Ikhwan al-Muslimun align themselves with the Rafida. And he knows the masses, they don't like the Rafida. They know that there's a difference. At the very least, the general people know, you're either Sunni or Shia. The very least. So they know we're not Shia. So they will reject the Ikhwan al-Muslimun because they align themselves with those who curse the Prophet ﷺ, those who say the Quran is incomplete, those who believe that their imams are divine. These crazy beliefs, they reject that, the general masses. So they made a major mistake in aligning themselves with the Rafida Shia. And it is a major book for in refutation of the Rafida, the Shia, this book. Also, in 1427, there is a professor in Medina who wrote a book regarding the artifacts of Medina and seeking blessings through them. Because this is the way of the Sufiya. And the Sufiya were old in Medina too. There were a lot of Sufi because of from the Ottoman Empire. So they had these ways of seeking blessings with religious artifacts, which we know is not from the way of Islam. At-tabarruk is not made with these items except with Allah Azza wa Jalla, what Allah has put barakah in. Allah has told us that there is blessings in. And when the Prophet ﷺ was alive, then yes, from his body and from his sweat and from his wudu, what came off of his body, there was barakah in. And the Prophet ﷺ and the companions seek barakah from the actual hair and from the Prophet ﷺ physical body. This was legislated. But after that, none of the Sahaba sought barakah with any one of themselves from each other, or sought barakah from anything that was physical, tangible, except that which was mentioned in the religious texts. So even the Hajar al-Aswad is not for barakah because it is from the Kaaba. We don't seek barakah from the Kaaba. We just follow the rituals of Hajj and touching it or kissing it. It's not tabarruk. So the seeking of blessings from something tangible requires a religious text. But this individual had wrote that there were religious artifacts from Medina that you can seek blessings from. So the Shaykh wrote a very beneficial refutation. براءة الأصحاب الأخيار من التبرك بالأماكن والآثار. The freeing or the disassociation of the companions, the noble companions, from seeking blessings with places and artifacts. So the companions were not upon this. And the Shaykh brought that clearly in this book, a refutation about those who seek blessings from the Sufiya with the walls. And they go to the Masjid al-Nabawi or Mecca. In Mecca, they're wiping the walls, seeking barakah from the walls and the pillars and the Kaaba. And even a person who they see to be righteous, they start wiping their hands on them. This is all seeking blessings from things that is not legislated to do so. Very important book. We concluded this, before we jump to the conclusion. In 1428, that one was 1427, right? In 1428, there were several books that were printed regarding the rights of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the right of Isa alayhi salam. So we have the slide first. The slide here is the book in Arabic was Huquq al-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it talks about the rights of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Shaykh gathered many of his previous talks and previous writings and gathered it in this book, Huquq al-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam wal-intisaru lahu wal-shari'ah, and giving victory to him in the legislation. From those articles in that was Makanatul Rasul sallallahu wa huquqihi, the status of the Messenger of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his rights. And this coincided with what event? This 1428, 2008, that the Shaykh is writing about the status of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it's translated in approximately around the same time. Now, the caricatures that were made of the Prophet ﷺ in Denmark. So the Shaykh is aware, he's alert, and he is writing these authorships about the status of the Prophet ﷺ and his rights, so that the Muslim Ummah is aware, and that we don't stay silent upon someone insulting and reviling the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this was translated by our Shaykh Abu Hafsa. So also the Shaykh not only wrote about the status of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he wrote about the status of Isa alayhi salam, Makanatu Isa fil Islam. And this was translated into English in 1428 by Al-Ibana. And so the Shaykh, he wrote books for the Western world, and he was always showing concern. He was always showing concern for the Muslim Ummah. And he knew that many of his students and many of the followers of the Shaykh, they lived in the Western part of the world. So he wrote in topics that concerned them. And the majority of the Western world is Christian. And so he wrote the status of Isa alayhi salam, and it was translated by one of the brothers. And look at the effects of the Shaykh's da'wah, even here in America, almost 20 years after he wrote it. And this is found in a library in the United States, the status of Isa alayhi salam. So the likes of this should be propagated. We let the brothers take a look at it. Likes of this should be propagated and shown to the people, that they claim that our scholars are ignorant of the what? Current events, the waqi'. They're ignorant of what the people are doing in the West. They don't know the reality. They don't know how to modernize Islam for the West. But they understand the West better than us. They have analyzed it, and understood Islam correctly, and they know where Islam stands with regards to what has emerged, because it's nothing but a repetition of the history. Also, from the books that were translated is the Makanatu Sahabati fil Islam. This was more recent, 1433 was translated by Mirath Publications. Makanatu as-Sahabati fil Islam, the status of the companions in Islam. It was written before that, but it was translated in 1433. Also in 1428, look at 1428, what's going on? A lot of refutation. This is over here now, yeah. The Shaykh, in the 2000s, you have the political climate changing. You have wars being fought, correct? And you have this Wahhabi claim really becoming popular in the news. 2008. And so the Shaykh wrote as a refutation of an individual who tried to make the Shaykh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab to be an extremist, or saying came with something new. So he wrote this book, دحر افتراءات أهل الزيغ والارتياب عن دعوة الإمام محمد بن عبد الوهاب نقد حسن المالكي. This is a refutation of those who spoke ill of the da'wah, of the call of Muhammad ibn Wahhab, and the lies they made about the call of Muhammad ibn Wahhab, that either he was a takfiri, or that he just made takfir of everyone, which we still see being made up, still that lie is still being spread. This is far from the truth, that he was from the most patient with the people, and he did not rush to claiming them to be kuffar. He was patient and established the proofs, and did not say that someone was a kafir before they were shown the truth and they had no excuse left. So he would give the people excuses. And he was not one who rushed into takfir. And his books are all based on Quran and Sunnah. This was the call of the Shaykh. The Shaykh outlines that in this book, and there is a taqdeem. The other scholars recognize the virtue of this, and they wrote an introduction to it from the Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan and Ahmed al-Najmi and Shaykh Zayd al-Madkhali. Rahimallahu man mat wa hafidhallahu man baqi. So we pass this around. This is in defense of the Shaykh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad ibn Wahhab, and his da'wah and his call. Moving along to now, those were the writings from the Shaykh that I chose to speak about. Those are the main works that the Shaykh wrote with his hand. And if I missed something, inshallah, the brothers can inform me from the major works. And there are things that I missed that were less than that in status. There were many refutations that were important in shaping the da'wah. The refutations of al-Ma'ribi, the refutations of al-Halabi, the refutations of al-Minibari, the refutations of Adnan Arur, the refutations of Abdurrahman ibn Khaliq, the refutations of al-Haddad. These were famous refutations. Safar al-Hawari was Salman al-Awda. Over 20 individuals, the Shaykh has a writing about them, that what they corrupted from the religion of Islam and how they must return back to the truth in defense of the religion. So there are many of those writings and refutations that shaped the da'wah, and they corrected it, rectified the da'wah, the call to Allah Azza wa Jal. Now these last books that I chose, also in chronological order, is the explanations of the Shaykh that were printed. From the earliest of them is the Shaykh, he has a ta'liq upon the Risala of Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, al-Farq bayn al-Nasihati wal-Ta'yir. Because we know the Shaykh is constantly being accused of, and even to this day, after his passing, rahimahullah, that he was not one that wanted sincere advice. He was hasty. He wanted to expose the people. He wanted to iflah, to expose not wanting good for them, wanting to show the people's. He just wanted to show the mistakes of someone. He didn't want good for them to repent. So the Shaykh, he commented and he did a sharh of the book of Ibn Rajab, which shows us the difference between sincere advice and exposing someone for with an ill intent. The difference between that. And the Imam Ibn Rajab brings the differences between that. How do you know something is sincere advice and how do you know it is fadiha? Farq bain al-nasiha wal-fadiha. And it is titled, this sharh is a naqd manhajun shar'i. A naqdu manhajun shar'i. That criticism, and this was the life of the Shaykh. The Shaykh was in the early ages in his doctorate, a nukat, and he is working with a work that is based on criticism. That the Shaykh Ibn Hajar is criticizing Ibn Salah and criticizing Iraqi, and the Shaykh is commenting on both criticisms. And he says in the muqaddimah of the Nuqat, he says, and I am nobody to criticize these great Imams. But he said, but because the truth is more beloved to us, then I chose to speak with what I believe to be the truth, as was the way of the people of the past, that the truth was more beloved to them. And he's like, there's no stronger proof than the book that I am doing here that shows us that the Imam Ibn Hajar criticized his Shaykh because he saw that there were some things that were not clear from him. And they both commented and clarified some mistakes of Ibn Salah because the truth was more beloved to them. So the criticism is a legislated way because the truth is more beloved to us than anybody's status. And that is done in a way that is gentle, in a way that is good. And the Shaykh shows us in this book, in his explanation of it, explanation of al-farq bayn al-nasihati wal-ta'yir, is he shows us the difference and he explains how criticism is a way of the people of the past and the way of the scholars. And this book was translated by Shaykh Abu al-Hasan Malik Hafidhahullah, and it is available for those who want to look into the work of the Shaykh and benefit from. The Shaykh was accused, like we said, of falsely that he was hasty and that he criticized without proof and that he just listened to everyone. This is a common claim, and he just listens to whoever's around him and he just lashes out. Whoever tells him something, he doesn't verify and he just lashes out on that based upon that claim. No. We see from the works of the Shaykh, he verifies what he hears. He's a verifier. He's a muhaqqiq. That's his life. He's verifying that whatever was said, it goes back to whoever said it before he even speaks about it. And when he criticizes with the proof available. And when he criticizes, he does it with gentleness and based on knowledge. So that is the way of the Shaykh. And that's what the Shaykh highlights here. That this criticism is a legislative methodology. This is for those who want to look at the text. The next book that he explained was the great work of Imam Ahmad, Usul al-Sunnah. And this was taught in a dawrah in 1422. 2002, the Shaykh taught this book, Usul al-Sunnah, and it was put into print. It was transcribed. What does it mean to be transcribed? That the audio, somebody writes it down. Transcribed, tafriq. So the Shaykh did not write this with his own hand, but rather he taught this. And there was an audio, and the people transcribed it into a book, like a naqd, the book about a naqd, the same thing. It was transcribed, and this is also transcribed. Usul al-Sunnah. There's many other prints of this book since 1427. There are many reprints of the book, but this was the first print in 1427, in 2007. Then we have, I believe in 1431, I missed one, was the sharh of Sharh al-Sunnah lil-Imam al-Barbahari. So it says here it's 1432. 1432 is here the book of the Shaykh sharh of Sharh al-Sunnah lil-Imam al-Barbahari. This was taught by the Shaykh and then it was put into print 1432. 1431, 1432, around that time, this was put into print. This is 2 volumes. This is the second volume here. And so this is a 2-volume book, and this is the only print that I know. عون الباري, he called it, ببيان ما تضمنه شرح السنة للإمام البربهاري. This is the name of his sharh. And like we said, this is not written by him, but this was a tafriq, transcribed. And this is the copy of the Maktaba. You guys can take a look at that. And then 1434, the most recent book that was explained by the Shaykh in Mecca is al-Sharia lil-Jurri. Al-Sharia lil-Imam al-Jurri. And that is called al-Dhari'a ila Bayan Maqasid al-Sharia. In 1434 it was printed, but it was taught for 3 years or some odd years at his house in Mecca. And I believe when we got there it was going on. It was still being taught in Mecca. This book, this sharh of al-Sharia. And that's the most recent of the books from his. Actually, there is Aqidat al-Raziyain. It was here. No. After this, there was also a print of Sharh Aqidat al-Raziyain. This was the second print in 1440, but there was a print before this. So the Shaykh explained the Aqidah of al-Raziyain, Abi Zur'a and Abi Hatim al-Raziyain. And it is called Qurratul Aynaini bitawdihi ma'ani Aqidat al-Raziyain. That is another explanation that the Shaykh taught this book, and it was transcribed. I don't know if that's clear. This has like a plastic on it. It's shining. Okay, so this is Qurratul Aynaini bitawdihi ma'ani Aqidat al-Raziyain. So the Shaykh, he explained most of the main works in Aqidah. In his latter part of his life, he showed concern for what? Aqidah. Just like he did in the beginning of his life. But he did it through teaching the people. So there was less works written in the end of his life, but more teaching of the people, and then his students transcribed his teachings into books. So this is Qurratul Aynain. So those were the books that I wish to share from the works of the writings of the Shaykh, and those that were transcribed from his teachings. The last 6 books I mentioned were transcribed from his what? From his teachings. So when he taught a book, it would be transcribed and put into a book, that explanation. And there are many other books that we could speak about. There are either collections of his statements, such as Marhaban Talib al-Ilm. Marhaban Ya Talib al-Ilm is a collection of his statements and speech that he advised the students of knowledge with. And this is a very beneficial collection. Marhaban Ya Talib al-Ilm سلسلة من التوجيهات الأثرية والوصايا السنية لطلاب العلوم الشرعية. So it is a series of advices and athari advices and advices that are also based upon the Sunnah for those who seek the knowledge of the Sharia. There's a collection. So we have some sittings with the people of different buldan. I believe there's a sitting with the Americans in this book that he advises some of the American students with. And there's different writings and articles regarding different virtues of knowledge and the seeking of knowledge that you can benefit as a student of knowledge from this book tremendously. It is for the beginner and the muntahi and the one who is at the end of his stage of learning. And this is a book that no one should be sufficing without it. This is an important book. It has important advices regarding the seeking of knowledge. And the others are collections as well of different areas of knowledge and collections of his refutations and his statements. We have Majmu' of his Rudud, collection of his refutations against different individuals, Abil Hasan al-Ma'ribi and other than him. This one is about Abil Hasan specifically. All of these writings he wrote about Abil Hasan al-Ma'ribi, who is Egyptian originally but studied and lived in Yemen, in Ma'rib. And he caused a lot of confusion in the Western world with his new principles that he brought into the da'wah. So the Shaykh, when he read his works, recognized that he must be refuted because he was trying to unite the people like the Ikhwan did upon falsehood, not speak about the errors of the people, just to unite. So the Shaykh, he brings him the proofs that unity is upon the truth. Unity is not upon falsehood. And this can be looked at from the refutations against Abil Hasan al-Ma'ribi. He has some also scholarly works that he did later in his life. الإصابة في استدراك ما فات الحجوري من الأحاديث في كتابة مفاريد الصحابة. في كتابه مفاريد الصحابة. This book, in 2 volumes, I think, or 2 editions, Al-Hajuri was refuted by the Shaykh for his extremism and his ghulu in criticism. He followed the way of Al-Haddad in refuting people without proofs. And this actually is a more scholarly criticism about the writing of Al-Hajuri. Al-Hajuri wrote a book, Mafarid al-Sahaba, in which he brings narrations that only one Sahabi narrated, or a Sahabi that has only one narration. Something like this. So the Shaykh, he is criticizing and showing that no, this Sahabi has more than one narration, or this narration has more than one Sahabi who narrated. So the mistakes in the actual academic work, and istidrak ma fat al-Hajuri, showing what he missed in his works. And so these are academic criticisms, and there are many books that we can speak about, but I think we will suffice with that for today. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. We ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to put all of these works on the scales of good of the Shaykh, and may Allah allow us to benefit from them. And may Allah Azza wa Jalla make us from those who are diligent in seeking knowledge and in acting upon our knowledge. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا ورزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا ورزقنا اجتنابه. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
In regards to the refutation and Sayyid Qutb and the trajectory of the Ikhwan Muslimin, what are some of the manhaj, some of the description of those that claim Salafiyya, but they have Ikhwani principles, and they ascribe to the Shaykh that he started a new manhaj. They say the Madkhali.
Yeah, so the Shaykh, he never called to himself, he never called to a hizb, he never called to being a new group. As we know, the Shaykh called to the Sunnah, acting upon the Sunnah, and calling to Allah Azza wa Jal as the way of the Anbiya, the way of the Prophets, as he outlined in Manhaj al-Anbiya. And the Shaykh, due to him acting upon the Sunnah and being stern in holding on to the Sunnah, he opposed many of the groups, like we said, Jama'at al-Ikhwan al-Muslimin and the Jama'at al-Tablighi. He opposed them in their methodologies. And from their methodology, specifically the Ikhwan, is the overthrowing of rulers and the speaking ill of the rulers, the Muslim rulers. And we know the Sunnah clearly opposes that. So when the Shaykh called the people to obeying the Muslim ruler and not speaking ill of them, not inciting the masses against the Muslim ruler, because that is more corruption than good, they saw these teachings as being something new, because they rejected that it is the Sunnah. They refused to accept that is the Sunnah. So they said it must be something new. And it must be something new that this Shaykh came with. So whoever has this loyalty to the Muslim rulers and he obeys them, but the Shaykh, he was teaching the people the Sunnah, which is لا معصية للخالق في لا معصية للخالق في طاعة المخلوق. That you don't obey the rulers, they command you disobedience. But in everything other than that, you obey them, as long as they're not kuffar. So they saw this loyalty to the Muslim rulers as Shaykh Mustafa mentioned yesterday, as being either an agent for the government or as being from those who created this new hizb, this new group that acts only in favor of the government or is sponsored by the government, because they were teaching the people to be obedient to the Muslim rulers, because that's the way of Ahl Sunnah. That's an old methodology from the days of Ibn Abbas, the days of al-Hasan al-Basri, the days of the companions and the tabi'een. That was their manhaj. That's what the Prophet ﷺ taught them. It's not something new, but because he opposed their way, al-Mawdudi, Qutb, and the rest of the Ikhwan, they attributed that way to him. And they said whoever has this loyalty and listens to the hukam and he praises the hukam, he is from the Madkhali. So much so that some of them, they don't know what they're talking about. They say they're called Madkhali because they do dukhul. And the Khawarij do khuruj. They just don't know what they're talking about. You know, they don't know that the name of the Shaykh is Madkhali. And they do dukhul upon the hukam, so that's why they're Madkhali. So they lost the plot, as they say. So the Shaykh, he was not a person who taught the people to be partisan to him, to follow him, or follow his hizb. Rather, he taught the people to return their prayers to the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Messenger Muhammad. And those groups, and those who follow them today, take upon their way, which is what? Gathering the people upon falsehood. Staying silent upon what we disagree upon. We cooperate in what we agree upon. This is the way of the Ikhwan. We cooperate in what we agree upon, we stay silent on what we disagree upon. You speak about the Sahaba, that's okay. Don't speak about the Sahaba in front of me. You speak about Uthman, that's okay. We can be together, we can work together. We can work it out. This is what they teach. You go to the graves and worship on Friday, that's okay. I'll go to the masjid, but you can go to the graves, we can work it out. We can do ta'awun. We can work together on what we agree upon, and we stay silent upon what we disagree upon. So they stay silent upon all the evil. These Ikhwan al-Muslimin. And likewise those who follow them and try in sake of overthrowing the rulers, they want to keep as much people so they can get to the rulership, so they get to the power. So they want to gather the people. And Shaykh Rabi, he spoke the truth even if he was alone. He didn't care about gathering the masses. And this is how the previous mashayikh that stood firm were. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, Imam Ahmed before him, Imam Ahmed, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, Shaykh Muhammad al-Wahhab. All of them, they spoke the truth even though they were in the minority and the people opposed them. And they faced the criticism of the people because of it. But they stayed firm. So Shaykh Rabi was like them. Likewise Shaykh al-Albani. Shaykh Rabi was one of the most beloved people to Shaykh al-Albani. And Shaykh al-Albani was beloved to him. And he praised Shaykh al-Albani has praise of his refutations of Sayyid Qutb, especially Awasib. He said it's from the best that's been written about Sayyid Qutb. And so the mashayikh of Sayyid Rabi' praised him for his writings against Sayyid Qutb and the followers of the Ikhwan and those that took upon that methodology. So those who take upon that methodology, they don't like Shaykh Rabi' because he exposes their falsehood. He exposes them that they are upon falsehood. They're not upon the way of the Sahaba, they're not upon the way of the Salaf, and they don't like that. And again, this other point about the rulers, they want to, just like they said about the Prophet ﷺ, he's a magician, he's a sorcerer, he's a crazy person. They made these claims in the Quran, right? The Quran says that the Kuffar of Quraysh made these claims. Likewise, they'll make these claims about Shaykh Rabi' because he's upon the truth. They say he's an agent, that he was hasty, and he doesn't know he's being lied to. All these false claims. But the truth is that he wrote with knowledge, and his books are evident of that. And there is nothing in his books that calls to a hizb. that calls to being part of a group, rather returning back to the ancient affair of following the Sunnah like the companions. I don't know if that answers the question, but the affair of Shaykh Rabi was that he was upon the way of the previous scholars that we mentioned, and he called to upholding the Quran and the Sunnah in everything, in aqidah, in akhlaq, in siyasa, in politics, and in iqtisad, in economy. And uphold the Quran and Sunnah in all of your affairs. This is what the Shaykh called to. And that opposed, obviously, those who fell into revolting against the rulers. They followed politics that opposed Islam. That opposed them. So they had to silence the Shaykh. So they had to make up these false claims against him. But this is the reality of the affair. Wallahu a'lam. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam. Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi. جزاكم الله خيرا.